Okay, our next guest is Mr. Jerry Dewitt. He is a pastor, and he was part of the Clergy Project, and he is arguably the best here at atheism. Jerry, welcome to the Valley.
Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be with you.
Awesome. Now, Jerry, you're very well known south of the 49th parallel. You might not be as well known up here in Canada. Would you be so kind to give us the Reader's Digest of who Jerry Dewitt is?
Sure, but before I do that, let me brag a little bit. I was on the queue.
Ooh.
And it was probably the biggest day of sales for my book, Hope After Faith.
Oh.
It really skyrocketed after that interview came out.
Fantastic.
And so I've got several friends north of the border, fellow Clergy Project members. Catherine, who was once the executive director for the Clergy Project, has a wonderful book out. So there's a lot of wonderful connections that I have with Canada.
Fantastic.
So the Reader's Digest version would simply be that I was born into a fundamentalist culture. Primarily, my grandparents were the religious leaders of our little family. At age 17, I received the baptism of the Holy Ghost and a calling into the ministry. I was a minister of some form, whether it was associate pastor, pastor, evangelist, you name it, for the next 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
Through the course of those 25 years, I slowly, sometimes unintentionally, other times intentionally, reverse engineered the doctrine that I had been raised to believe and or doctrines that I had come to accept throughout my own study, all the way to the point of now 6 years ago realizing that I had studied my way into being an atheist. And through somewhat of a fluke, I got basically global recognition for that transition, originally due to a New York Times article written about me. And as they say, the rest is history.
Mm-hmm. So you were essentially the first one to really go through the Clergy Project.
So because it's almost a secret society, there's a few concepts that are a little bit hard to truly appreciate. And one of them is this, is that there's nothing to go through. What there is in the Clergy Project is a website that houses a forum where people can anonymously, primarily they choose to do so anonymously, communicate with each other over their common experience of being in the ministry but not believing, or having came out of the ministry because of their non-belief. And so it's an online forum, very secretive, very protected, and that's really all there is to the Clergy Project. Now, of course, there's a lot of different forms of support that come from that. There's a grant that a person can apply for to use towards trying to get different types of employment. There's other little benefits that naturally come from a community that is that niched. But there's no curriculum, and there's no debating, and there's no taking a doubting minister into the Clergy Project and deconverting them or anything like that. Now, Dan Barker, trying to be somewhat humorous, but I took it and ran with it, called me early on the first graduate of the Clergy Project. Now, what that meant was, there were about probably at least 50 other people already in the Clergy Project before I came into the Clergy Project, but I was the first one to come in as a minister, and then to publicly come out as a non-believer and leave the ministry. There are many people in the Clergy Project that have already left the ministry, but it either was done before the Clergy Project or it was not done publicly. There's a lot of different scenarios, but I was the first one to be in the ministry when I came into the Clergy Project and then publicly leave the ministry as an atheist. So Dan just in a board meeting just said, Jerry is the first graduate of the Clergy Project. And I ran with it, and as soon as that hit the interwebs, then that was part of my bio for a long time until the board actually asked me to stop using it because people were getting confused about it. That it did make people think that there was some type of curriculum that Richard Dawkins had developed to try to deconvert. You have to very much already be deconverted before you will even be allowed into the Clergy Project.
Okay, I will withdraw that then.
Yeah, that's my 25-minute answer to a 25-second statement. I apologize.
That's okay. That's okay. So you obviously grew up in a religious family, and you went into becoming a pastor yourself. And well, folks, if you guys don't know Jerry Dewitt, if you meet the gentleman, he is a Southern gentleman. You have to absolutely say that about him. Right. Absolutely, he does personify Southern gentleman. You and I met at Imaginal Religion 4. You probably don't remember because you meet a ton of people. But anyway, I was just struck by that right away. And you still have that pastoral swagger, I would say.
Yes, I do. I don't really know how to get rid of it, and I don't know if I want to get rid of it. It's definitely part of who I am most of the time, or in certain situations. I think it'd be fair to say if you followed me around 24 hours a day for a week, you would see at least one or two occasions where I was not carrying myself quite so pastorally.
So were you always a pastor before coming out as an atheist?
I started off as an evangelist. Well, I guess technically I started off somewhat as an associate pastor. The little country church that my grandmother was going to that I eventually became a part of, I was raised in and around it. But at 17, I joined it and very quickly became, the associate pastor for that little church, but didn't really have many pastoral duties other than preaching to the almost non-existent Wednesday night crowd, helping corral the youth group, filled with teenagers who wanted to be anywhere but there, and to preach every so often on a Sunday morning, which was the big crowd and was a big pleasure. But I quickly moved into evangelism, and my wife and I, until our son was born, and just a little while after he was born, we traveled the southern states evangelizing, holding revival services.
Wow.
So it would be for a few more years that I would actually become an associate pastor again, and then eventually would pastor two of my own churches as the senior pastor.
Wow. Pretty impressive. And that short of a time.
That's an impressive career right there.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it probably looks like it on paper and sounds like it over the radio, but, I have to still fluff my resume,
So what were the first inklings that you had that you might not necessarily believe?
Yeah. The very first thing was the doctrine of eternal punishment, of eternal damnation, the doctrine of hell. That was the very first thing. I was two things from the very beginning, 16, 17 years of age, beginning to preach. I was both egotistical and at the same time honest about myself. And so when it became my duty to stand up and to preach the platform of our denomination at the time, even though we were independent, we were still very much in line with the United Pentecostals. Hell was a big part of that doctrine, avoiding hell, not going to hell, all the different things, the myriad of offenses that you could commit on a daily basis that would make you worthy of eternal punishment. And so when it became my responsibility to get up and preach about that subject, I took it very seriously. It was not something that I could just regurgitate. I had to know when I looked out at this congregation. Like I said, for two reasons. One, I was egotistical enough that I never really was afraid of going to hell. Even before I got quote unquote saved or filled with the Holy Ghost, I just kind of always had this feeling that, if God loved anybody, he loved me. If God wanted to spend time with anybody, he'd want to spend time with me. I mean, who would? Come on. And so I never really was afraid of hell. Now, I was very much as a child afraid of dying and afraid of abandonment. And for years upon years, I could not go to sleep at night without saying the little rhyme, "Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take." It really was more about praying about dying than going to heaven for me. So when I looked out over the congregation, I had difficulty in my sincerity, the second side of that. I had difficulty looking at these people that I knew and knew fairly intimately and thinking that somehow I was immune from going to hell, but they were not. Because I knew myself well enough to know that if they were bad, I was just as bad. If they were sinners, I was just as much a sinner. I was very, very, very aware of my imperfections. Not trying to take the show in the wrong direction, but being a 17-year-old non-married individual, there were habits that I engaged in that were not that were kosher for the young preacher.
No, don't worry. The show is not always family friendly either. So,
In which you draw inspiration from for said hobbies. And so I went to the pulpit, repented of that every single time, and that just made me, I guess, in some ways, as egotistical as I was, it actually made me also humble. And I thought, if I'm going to preach this thing called hell, I've really got to dig into this and find out the truth of it. I mean, it's pretty important. And so I began to study, and I did the very thing that you're not supposed to do. I began to study the writings, the teachings, the doctrines of people who did not belong to our denomination and get different points of view on it. And not too long after my investigation started, I began to see that there was at least a possibility that God had not handwritten the Bible personally, that maybe there was some, human influence. There might even be some politics. There might even be some, manipulation within the Bible for certain political or religious purposes. And so once the inerrancy of the Bible came into question, there really wasn't any going back to where I had been. And so from there on, it was really a struggle of trying to find out what the truth really was and how I could find my place as a minister. Because being a minister, for me, was almost as important as being saved or anything else, And so I kept trying to find a doctrine that looked like it was 100% right, that felt right as well, that would allow me to continue to minister without totally destroying the world that I lived in, all while at the same time trying to ignore the whole thing as well. And as I've always said, days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months, months turn into years before you know it.
So I guess it must be difficult when you're a preacher because, like the old adage says, those who live in a glass house shouldn't throw rocks. It's kind of It must be hard to be preaching damnation and repent now when you yourself saw yourself as flawed.
Yeah, never could. I never could do it. I was by far probably Pentecostalism's worst evangelist, because your job is to stand up and call everyone to repentance and try to, for lack of better words, intimidate them into repenting and coming to the altar and confessing their sins and getting saved or baptized in the Holy Ghost or whatever particular doctrine they were in, um, I I would get these revival services scheduled. I would show up, and I would end up preaching pastoral messages night after night after night. More of a little bit Joel Osteen like. You can make it. God's on your side. Everything's going to be okay. Everything but the prosperity gospel. I also never was able. I was never able to get into the damnation side of things because I would have felt hypocritical for doing it. And I never was able to get into the prosperity gospel of trying to just talk people into giving up their money.
Yeah, somebody who can do the prosperity gospel is probably the ultimate mark of knowing this guy is a good salesperson. If you can sell that stuff, it's like, oh, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah, and it's a really unique showroom, for lack of better words. There's even science, obviously, that goes into designing a showroom for a car dealership, and there's not necessarily science that's gone into designing the church service and the different mechanisms that are at play within the service or even the institution itself. But as Daniel Dennett, brings out, it's evolution. Literally, social evolution has really brought about the most effective techniques that you could find, and it actually, if you can't sell in church, you probably can't sell anywhere.
Yeah, actually, we did an interview just very recently with Dr. Del Rey where we talk about hypnotism in church. I'm assuming you find yourself looking back today and saying, "Yeah, I was doing those techniques, whether you knew of them or not. You were selling a message."
This is a place. This is a little bit of a place. I think Dr. Del Rey and he and I we've worked together a great deal. It actually brought me on as the first volunteer executive director for Recovering from Religion. All these years ago now, and I recommend his book, The God Virus, very regularly. And I also call myself a secular sexual because of the philosophy that he's created around that. But I have a slight nuanced opinion on the hypnotism. I don't think that he's wrong. I just think that there's so much more to it than that. I don't think the hypnotism is as powerful as sometimes it sounds like, and I'm getting this sometimes third-handed, so, I hope he forgives me if he hears this and thinks I'm disagreeing with, a false premise. But I don't think the hypnotism is as powerful as people make it out to be, particularly in normal settings. I think there are so many other personal needs that a person brings to that service that it doesn't require the level of hypnotism that I think sometimes ministers are accused of being able to perform, much less intentionally be able to perform. Even when you look into a church service, which would seem as obviously hypnotic as, say, a Benny Hinn, where he's able to just blow with his mouth in the direction of one, quarter of a stadium, and several hundred people fall down, under his quote unquote spell. There's even more to it than that, and the only reason that matters to me is, number one, I really don't want ministers getting credit for something they don't have, which is some magical level of hypnotism. But also, I don't want the situation to ever be watered down to something as simple as a Las Vegas trick that you would see in a nightclub. I'm always promoting how complicated this situation is. And I'm going to tell you, it proves how sorry of a salesman I am, because the last thing that sells is complication.
No, I think you're very right. I think you have a very good point there. And like they say, you cannot hypnotize, for lack of a better word, you cannot hypnotize somebody who doesn't want to be. So
right.
If you're suggestible, half the time it's because you want to be too.
Yeah, I have allowed myself to fall backwards while being prayed for because that's what everyone else was doing and that's what the minister expected. And, and I knew very well that there was no power, overcoming me. Now, there have been times that I did feel like there was a power. That's a different story altogether. But it makes me at least wonder how many other people are just as conscious of willingly submitting to the act, So.
And then suddenly, like you said earlier, you find yourself seeing the light or joining the dark side, whichever way you want to say it. I prefer the dark side because we have cookies. And then you end up in the New York Times.
Yeah. And so what I prefer to say is that I graduated from my faith. I don't like to say I lost my faith because that sounds like you lost your keys, or you, it either means, when you say you lost your faith, and I'm not in any way criticizing anyone who says that because I think my dear friend Dan Barker has really, really gotten the world's attention with that phrase, lost my faith or lost faith. So I'm not criticizing it. I just prefer not to say it because sometimes it sounds like you lost something simply inconvenient, like your keys that can be replaced, or like you lost a loved one, someone who died, and you'll never get over it. It's a loss that there's no recompense or recovery from. I prefer to say I graduated from my religion, and what I mean by that is I look back over my life and I see my religious experience as a test of my integrity, a test of my ability to reason, a test of my love for humanity, because that plays a very big role in my deconversion as well. A test of my personal integrity. Did I already say that one? Yeah, integrity. I think it was a test of my internal fortitude. I see my religious experience as a test, and I think coming out on the other side and being able to realize that I was an atheist and no longer try to play word games in order to postpone that revelation, and then to be public about it in understanding what the loss is going to be, I feel like I graduated, like I passed the test, is the way I feel about it.
I absolutely agree with you. I think that's a better way of putting it. Losing your faith does always make it sound like you've lost something precious, which in reality it's not. So you're out there now, and all of a sudden people know that Pastor Jerry Dewitt is a non-believer. There must have been some backlash of some kind. I mean, a lot of people go through social suicide, and you're a pastor all your life at that point. It must have been terrifying. What am I going to do? That's the first thing that goes through your head, I would think.
It was. I was afraid of it for some time. The closer that I would get to admitting to myself where I was heading, the more afraid, obviously, I would be of the repercussions. If I, first off, I knew that if I ever truly accepted where I thought I was going, my integrity would force me to make a move, because I had made dozens of costly moves throughout my religious career. If my doctrine changed enough that I no longer felt at home or felt like I didn't believe 98% of what the people around me believed, I had enough respect for them and for myself to basically disregard everything that I had built up and start over, and bless my poor family's heart. We've started over many, many times. And I don't know if you can imagine this or not, but that's not very financially wise. Starting over and over again doesn't help the bank account. It doesn't help your credibility. It doesn't help a lot of things other than your sense of personal integrity. So I knew that if I allowed myself, or when I finally did accept this reality, I would make a move. And then I knew that move would ultimately ripple out into the public, and that it would be costly. I honestly, though I was afraid of it, in another way, once again, I was egotistical, and I thought, I love so many, I've taken care of so many people, I've helped so many people. If anybody can get away with this, I can. Everybody will still love me, or at least most people will still love me, and if anybody can get away with this, I can. So on one hand, I was horrified. On another side, I was hopeful because of my, ego. And my ego side turned out to be incredibly wrong. And my fearful side greatly underestimated what was going to happen.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we lost virtually every friend that we had. I
Mm.
would say out of several dozen friends and hundreds of acquaintances, we were probably left with maybe two or three friends at the most. We lost all of the relationships with our family, especially in the very beginning, except for about three or four relationships
Ouch.
out of the large extended family. We received death threats.
Oh,
Wow.
You name it. You name it. We were pariahs.
did somebody ever try to approach you with a pair of clippers and say, "Convert back to God, or your hair gets it"?
No, no, they. I think I might have taken some solace in if they actually would have gotten that close to me, you know. But
Wow.
instead, I, I've been a pastor, a minister of some kind for 25 years. I have been in public service. I've been the mayor's chief of staff. I've been the code enforcement officer. I've worked at City Hall off and on for almost 10 full years. So I had a very public secular career at the same time that I was doing all these other things. And so I was accustomed to not being able to go to Walmart. My wife would literally not let me go to Walmart with her because what would be a 15-minute in and out trip for her would be no less than a 45-minute trip if I went, because we would constantly be stopped by people who wanted to wish us well, shake our hands, say hello, ask for a favor, ask for help, get advice, you name it. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say probably every fifth or sixth aisle there would be somebody there who would know us and would reach out to us. And so word spread so quickly that it was shocking to watch time after time on a single trip to Walmart to watch people turn around and go the other way whenever they spotted us.
Wow, that's amazing. And shame on them. And I know, Jerry, I promised to not reveal the secret of yours, but for people that don't know, Jerry's like Samson of atheism. The better his hair is, the stronger and the more powerful he is. So if you really want to
That's a
beat him, you got
fact.
to shave his hair.
That's a fact. They should have got closer to me. They should have got closer to me and shaved my head. Absolutely.
You
Yeah.
hear you hear a lot of stories like that of people, essentially almost committing social suicide, and that's the heavy price to pay for
Yeah.
people going into apostasy. But knowing you, you're a very positive kind of fellow. What did you gain?
Yeah, so all kind of things I gained. Now, I put on a good front. If you ask my wife, she would probably tell you that I'm one of the most negative people that she knows.
Oh, really?
Um, and so I put on a really, really good front. But I've battled. I've never been clinically diagnosed with any form of depression, but just knowing of other people's symptoms, I'm sure that I've battled different, phases of depression. I can tell you that I definitely battled an all-consuming season of anxiety disorder, panic attack disorder, became agoraphobic in different ways. My nervous system
Oh.
has definitely been put through the ringer at different times. So I don't want anybody, and the reason I'm telling you this is, as I was leaving the ministry, the last few years of my ministry, one of the most rewarding things that I stumbled upon and then would consciously do for the rest of the remainder of my Christian ministry is I would be very, very open about my shortcomings whenever I was speaking. And I could tell that it made an enormous difference to the lay members setting out in the congregation, because they just assume that the reason that you're elevated up on that platform is because you're better than them, and that can become so cemented in their minds that they won't even reach out and let you know what's really going on with them at times. Because they're embarrassed, because they just assume you don't know what it's like. And so once I started getting up and telling people, hey, I've had these problems, this is what I'm struggling with, those kind of things. I even talked openly about my doubts towards the end of my ministry. Um, it was rewarding to me because of how ministering it was to the people in the congregation. So I just want people listening to y'all's show to know that I have battled with depression, I have battled with anxiety, probably I would put my anxiety war stories up against anyone's. I've battled with these things. I've battled with fear. I've battled with agoraphobia. I've battled with these things. Now, fortunately, allowing reason to become more of the staple of my thought life as much as possible, reason worked me out of some of these things. It's the reason why that I've been working on, not trying to overuse the word reason, but it is the reason why that I've been slowly working on a new book called Reasonably Happy. And I hope to put that out in the next year or so. But and it's the reason why that I'm now involved in life coaching. I hate that terminology, but that's what people recognize it as. Not being a clinical psychologist, not being a physician, but having ministered now 25 years in Christianity, but 6 years now in the secular movement, I think I've got a lot of experience to share. And I don't want anyone ever getting the idea that, that this perfect hair somehow makes you immune to the ups and downs of life.
Now I'm getting worried.
Believe it or not, I haven't forgotten the question.
No.
So the answer is it's actually the benefits, of course. First and foremost was a fantastic community. Perfect? Absolutely not. A pain in the butt many times? No doubt about it. But a wonderful and accepting, sometimes confusing family. If you can avoid the leadership of the movement, you're probably going to have an incredibly exciting and wonderful time with everybody else. Sorry, that was my little bit of jadedness. See, but of course, having that family was extremely rewarding. On top of that, though, stripping away that layer of facade and receiving the tsunami of rejection that came from doing that, it kind of, can you say the H word on your show?
Sure.
I'm not sure. So it kind of gives you a what the hell mentality, like what do I have to lose? Everybody would, people would vote for a child molester in office before they would vote for me as an atheist. What do I have to lose? I mean, what does it matter if they find out something else about me? Like I don't like mustard and mayonnaise or something. Whatever it is, a great liberty has come with this. And still, I'm only 6 years in, and so I'm still moving into that liberty. I'm still enjoying it more and more and finding other areas where I can say, hey, yeah, guess what, everybody at the table? I don't agree with y'all politically. This is how I feel about it. Or, hey, guess what, everybody? This is what I think about this very personal issue or that issue. And then I can go live and enjoy that, as well. And, of course, being able to still have some form of ministry in the secular movement has been very encouraging. And as I started off the show confessing my great battle with the ego, for 35 seconds becoming world famous was one heck of a rush.
Mr. DeWitt, your story is one of courage, and I certainly appreciate it. Before I let you go, can I a quick favor? Can I? What would you tell to these closeted atheists out there? What is words of wisdom, words of hope from Jerry Dewitt would be what?
So this is what I would tell you, and this is the same message I give ministers that I deal with on a regular basis. We have a Patreon account. People who donate to our Patreon account, what they're really doing is buying my time. I'm an independent consultant. That's how I make a living, and so I don't get paid by the hour. So every hour, no matter what hour that is during a 24-hour day that I take away from that work, I'm taking food and food money away from my family. So even when I stop to write an email or do a show like this or whatever, it's the patrons who are paying for me to be able to do these kind of things.
Oh, I feel super
guilty now. One of the most important things that they pay for is on a non-ending basis. I'm in communications with doubting ministers or ministers who already don't believe and are trying to figure out what they're doing. And the same principles that I teach them applies to the lay member, closeted atheist. And the number one thing is to remember time is on your side. Don't allow yourself to be religiously motivated to save the world from religion the same way that you were religiously motivated to save the world with religion. Don't get caught up in that same fervor. Time's on your side. Take the time to be strategic. Strategize an exit strategy, how you can come out, how you can leave the ministry, or whatever it is that you need to do, however it is you think you need to come out. If your conscience will allow you, take the time to develop a strategy to pass through that bottleneck as slick as possible. Now, there's a chance your conscience won't allow you to do it, and you're just at some Thanksgiving dinner not going to bow your head, start a conversation unintentionally, and by Christmas, nobody's talking to you because you're an atheist. You know, these things happen. What I would say to you is that there's not a more needy person on the planet than Jerry Dewitt. There's not a greater people pleaser on the planet than Jerry Dewitt. And if I can stand, at least for 35 seconds, the entire world thinking that I never was a Christian, that I'm doing this for the money, that I'm doing this because I hate God and He won't let me sin in my favorite way. That's a throwback to 17-year-old habits, whatever. If I can do this, I say to you, be brave and do it. Do it strategically, but do it. And do your best to develop a strategy that gets it done and over with as soon as possible. Do it smartly, but do it soon.
Fantastic advice. Fantastic advice. Jerry, the mic is all yours. Be shameless, my friend. Plug yourself. If people want to know more about you or contact you, where can they find you?
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Don't forget to plug your book, too.
I would be remiss if I didn't start with, if you'll go to jerrydewitt.net, don't be shocked. That will take you to our patron page. We'd love for you to check us out. We're just now, my son Paul is the second half, the other half of Team DeWitt, and we've been separated by 6 hours for about the last 10 months, plus a few months before that, two different types of separations. Physically separated. We're now back in the same studio. We're just now starting to record again. I recorded a Wednesday night message I would love for people to become a patron and listen to tonight or whenever they hear your broadcast. So just jerrydewitt.net will take you there. Also, though, if you enjoyed the book Hope After Faith, if you're interested in what Hope After Faith is all about, every third Thursday of the month now, we used to do it weekly, but now it's every third Thursday because of my consulting business and life coaching. Simply go to hopeafterfaithpodcast.com. You'll learn about the show. You'll see how to listen to it, and we would really, really appreciate you listening. My co-host, actually the producer and the Johnny Carson to my Ed, is none other than Bobby C. from No Religion Required.
Oh, wow.
And it is a true honor and pleasure to be working with that beautiful gentleman.
Fantastic. Jerry, so thank you so much for your time. But before I let you go, I got one more thing I got to let you, you got to do for me. Can I get you to say, hi, I'm Jerry Dewitt, and I took a left at the Valley.
Hi, I'm Jerry Dewitt, and I took a left at the Valley.